And we're live. Hello, everyone out there. It's August. This is our Photo Focus Lightroom Hangout. Sad to say, my co-host Levi Sim is unable to join us this month, but he's doing something even more fun than this, which is hard to believe. So we miss you, Levi, but we'll see you next month. I do have a guest who's been on once before. Jeff Stevens from Athentech is joining us this month, and we're kind of doing a part two. We did part one back in February. It was an excellent episode. We kind of ran short on time, so we wanted to have Jeff come back and kind of do that presentation for us again and really try to get to a lot more questions from our audience. So have your questions ready on Lightroom, on all of Athentech's products as well. Perfectly Clear, Perfect Exposure, Perfect Eyes. Speaking of those, Perfect Exposure is actually free, and I'll show you where to get that in a little bit here. Our Hangouts here on Photo Focus are sponsored this month by Athentech and by Drobo. So we thank them both for their sponsorship this month and in months past and even months future. So the way that we continue is by you guys watching this and joining us with your questions and your comments. And by putting those questions and comments into our feed here, you actually get entered to win one of our great prizes. So this month, Athentech is giving us two prizes to give away at the end. We'll be giving away one Perfectly Clear license and one Perfect Eyes license to two lucky winners. And the way that you do that, let me gonna share my screen here and just show you where to find this. It seems to help some folks. I know we have some return viewers, which is always great. So when the Hangout goes out, you might see it on the Photo Focus page. You can watch it there. That's totally fine. And it will be archived there. So if you can't watch the whole thing today, you can come back and watch it right on the Photo Focus page or on YouTube. So you can actually catch our last time on there as well. But when you get there, you might want to click the link over to the Google Plus event page, and you'll see the page looks like this. When it actually starts, click this play button, there's a Q&A option, all right? And so when the video is playing, come up to the top here, and there's this Q&A button. Click on that. That opens this Q&A panel on the side where you can ask a new question. Then we see your name, we see your question, and then you get entered to win in the drawing. So the drawing happens at the very end of our hour here. We'll remind you a couple more times throughout our presentation. And we've already got some folks joining in. That's awesome. Great to see a lot of familiar names here. So, with that out of the way, I'd like to welcome Jeff Stevens from Athentech. And Jeff is a product development director, department?
VP of Engineering.
VP of Engineering. Thank you, Jeff. And so, Jeff, thanks for coming back and joining us again. And we're right on time. Everything's working. That's awesome. And so it was a really fantastic presentation you did last time. A lot of great questions came in, and we didn't have time to get to all of them. So hopefully we'll get through those this month. Jeff, where are you actually geographically located?
Right now, I'm in Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas.
Home sweet home. I've been traveling all over this year, but I'm finally home, and I like that.
Yeah, well, it is good to be home. It's good to travel, but it's always really good to be home. I was out at Photoshop World last month. Yeah. Got caught in that Southwest snafu. It took me about 30 hours to get home from Las Vegas. Thanks, Seth. So yeah, it's very, very good to be home. Since our last Hangout that we had you on, Jeff, Lightroom has since released an update. So I want to kind of start there, and then we're going to jump into Jeff's awesome presentation. So when we talk about lies that cameras tell, we're having a little fun with it, but sometimes, the way we see the world is not exactly how the camera captures the data, the image. And there may be reasons because of the camera sensor or the lens, and Jeff's going to get into those pieces there. Sometimes it's actually due to the way our orientation, the way we hold the camera versus the scene that we're trying to capture. And so inside of Lightroom, I'll share my screen, and if you're not a Lightroom CC person, you won't have this, I'm sorry to say, but this is a new update that came inside of Lightroom CC. Are you able to see my screen there, Jeff? Is it
yep.
All right, perfect. All right, and so This is an image actually. Actually, it was an HDR capture that I merged inside of Lightroom. So actually, this was 3 exposures merged into one. And this was from a view in a hotel back in June or so. I was doing a thing in New York for Adobe, and I had a really great view of uptown New York from my room. And although I was pretty high up, there's still a little bit of perspective distortion from how my camera was angled to capture the scene. So inside of this most recent update to Lightroom, we see there was a change to the lens corrections panel and an addition of this transform panel. All right, and so inside lens corrections, there used to be a basic tab, and on that basic tab, we had these check boxes, and there was a color tab, and some of that stuff got moved around. So I just want to kind of orient folks to that. And so the remove chromatic aberration, that was in there before. It was on the basic panel, and then it was on the color panel. The color panel is now combined inside of this manual panel. All right, and that's where we took care of some chromatic aberration issues. We showed in our, if you go back to the link for our last episode, I went through a whole bunch of stuff on that, and hopefully it was helpful. And our throttles for controlling the vignetting amount and the lens profile correction amount are also under this manual tab. All right, so now you go between those two, and just by enabling this profile correction, we see that some distortion that was caused by this particular lens was corrected. All right, and so that's pretty visible. This was kind of a wide-angle, inexpensive zoom lens. I think it was the one that came with the camera that I was using at the time. In addition, we now, well, we used to have these upright buttons inside lens corrections. We now have this transform panel, and that's where all the upright stuff has gone. And so upright is Lightroom's functionality for trying to take care of some perspective distortions based on how you hold the camera relative to the senior setting, the senior capturing, oftentimes with big buildings, and you're standing on the ground and you're pointing the camera up, and you see it much more noticeable than in here. And so some of the things you can fix in here is just leveling. So if this was, the level was off and there was a really obvious horizon, sometimes this level will do it. I did try to level it, I think pretty good before I took it. I had the camera mounted with suction cups to the window of my room there, and that made it kind of easy to pick a height and really get it up as high as I could reach. Then these buttons for auto and full and vertical try to take care of vertical perspective corrections. Auto tries to take care of level, aspect ratio, and perspective corrections. And sometimes auto does a pretty good job. It doesn't seem to really do too much for this image. But if I look at it, I can see there's a little bit of, looks like these buildings on the outer edges here seem to be kind of leaning backwards just a little bit, the ones closest to me. If I click on full, sometimes the full does a good job. Sometimes, though, it can really not do a good job. And so the new feature inside of this version of Lightroom is this guided upright, where you can kind of take a little bit of a manual control in trying to correct the perspective distortion. So if I click on guided here, I have this little crosshair icon appear, and all I want to do is draw what should be a straight line along this building that I think is just leaning backwards a little bit. We can see there's a magnified view coming up next to my cursor there that can help me, but I'm just trying to get this as close to being straight down as I can. And then I want to draw a second line in another place. And then those two things will help Lightroom say, okay, correct this upright. Make these lines straight up and down, all right? And I think it does a better job than either the auto or the full, and it's a nice little addition inside of Lightroom, right? And so those are some of the ways that Lightroom can kind of fix the data that our cameras can see. All right, so I'm going to switch out of my screen capture there, and I'm going to switch over to Jeff here. And maybe, Jeff, you could talk about some of the reasons why our cameras do this to us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I want to just follow on a little bit. Yeah, we had that first Hangout back in February. Got great comments and feedback from that. So I'll touch base a little bit on the camera technology and go through some of the that slide deck that I did back in February. Go into a little bit more detail there hopefully have more time for Q&A. We had a lot of questions come in after the Hangout last time because we were running a little long. So if you have questions, type them in. If I see them while I'm going, or Rob, if you notice a good one, jump in and point it out to me.
Will do.
And then at the end, we'll actually go into the plugin and see Perfectly Clear complete in action, and look at a handful of examples showing off what I'm talking about. With that, I will do my very best to share my screen here. And this is my little slide deck. So the Hangout's called Lies Cameras Tell. I prefer to say How Cameras See. There's no malicious intent on the camera side, so it's just seeing the world a different way than the human eye does. And that's really the main thing here. You can see these two things don't look very much alike. The eye is a complicated device. It's got rods and cones, which are the light sensing things. Cones detect color, all different colors, and they're spread around different parts of the back of your retina. And rods detect light and dark, and the pattern that those make on the back of your eye is not exactly random, but it's not a rigid grid either. If you look at how on the right a digital camera sees, light goes through a lens just like it does in your eye, but then it hits this very this color array grid. So you either get reds or blues or greens. That light passes through and hits an image sensor, and that image sensor back there only measures brightness. Basically, all it does is count photons coming through, which is different than your eye. Your eye will detect red light or blue light or green light, different colors lights. When light hits a cone. In a camera, the only way it knows what color that light is by knowing which colored filter was in front of that digital sensor. So if I skip ahead a slide, and this is one of the main things that causes a lot of different trouble with, like you said, chromatic aberration, and demosaicing. When you look at like the sharpness of an image, and you can see little jaggies, little stair-step lines. There are lots of different abnormalities that come through because of this very regular grid of greens and blues and red color filters. Your eye spreads those around mostly at random, sort of like color film did. You had color sensitive areas on a piece of film that were not in a rigid grid. So you didn't get things like moire patterns, and sharpening artifacts weren't nearly as prevalent back in the film days. So what we've done as a technology company is we've tried to make this mess of steps on the right work more like your eye does. And the reason we do that is to make the output more closely match what you saw before you hit the shutter. And that's basically Perfectly Clear's goal in life, is to make the digital files invoke that same emotion that you had when you took the picture. Rob, when you were in that hotel room looking over that scene, you took that picture because it had a certain emotional impression on you, and you wanted to convey that to the people that were looking at your image. Well, if the buildings aren't upright, and if the color's wrong, and if the exposure is blown out, it still kind of looks like the same scene, and you could say, yeah, I was at this hotel room, and it was really pretty. But the ability to evoke that emotional response is because the image looks like it did in your head when you first took that picture. So that's what Athentech tries to do. We try to get around a lot of those camera limitations. Some of them are just inherent in the way digital sensors work. So your 50 or 80 megapixel digital back medium format has the exact same problems that a cell phone camera does. They're linear capture devices. They shoot through a color filter array like this. They have a single aperture. When you look around, when you're up in that hotel room looking around, your pupils are constantly dilating and changing exposure. Mm-hmm. So not only can the human eye make out a wider dynamic range than any camera can, or any print device, monitor or print output, but it can also dynamically adjust as you look from a very, very bright area to a very dark area. And cameras can't do that. Film cameras can't do that, and digital cameras couldn't do that. Film had a little bit easier time with dynamic range because the dynamic range of the film and of the print process was wider than most monitors are today, and most image capture devices, most sensors are. So the problem got a little bit more pronounced when we went from film to digital, but it's always been a problem. It's just an inherent difference between a single aperture that's open for a split second versus your eye, which can scan and pull in different data and regulate the amount of light actually hitting the back of your eye. So one more sort of technical detail on the exposure side of things. So when those photons hit that image sensor, all that image sensor is doing is counting photons. So we've used this little bucket analogy. Each one of those little sensors back there is just a bucket. And as photons come in while the shutter is open, it measures how many hit that sensor over that amount of time, and then assigns a brightness level to it. If not enough drops enter the bucket, then it's too low to measure and it's just black. So it doesn't know the difference between very, very, very dark and just black. So it just fails to report any data there. And then there's this overflowing. So that's clipping on the top side. If too many photons hit, then it's just blown out pure white. And a thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the sensitivity of that sensor never changes. Back in the film days, you could put in ISO 100 film or ISO 1600 film, and the actual film was more or less sensitive to light. Well, that's not the case in the digital world. The sensor is what the sensor is, and it measures the same thing every time. As you change your ISO value and you go higher and higher up, basically what it's doing is it's saying, okay, at ISO 200, I'm going to call pure white what I would have called 50% or half as many photons as in ISO 100. And then at ISO 400, I'm just going to divide it again. These are linear light capture devices, so it's not the 18% gray that the human eye sees due to gamma curves and things like that. But it's literally half the number of photons. And so as you boost the ISO, you're really using less and less of that sensor. So that causes things like noise, false color, and a lot of the other things that, today's cameras that can shoot at ISO 64,000 and 128,000 and all these amazing things. That's all you're really doing. You're just amplifying the very, very lowest part of that digital signal, which is also not how your eye works. When you go into a dark room, your eye actually becomes more sensitive to light. If you look at a very bright object and then look away, you can still see a ghost of that very bright object because your eyes are remembering that, and there's this lag and an adjustment time between what your eye sees and how it measures photons. So again, very different devices. And what we've done at Athentech is to build some technology to do some very innovative things, a lot of patented technology to get over some of these basic differences between how photons are counted in a digital sensor and on the back of your eye. I'll go through some exposure examples in a minute, but the next big difference is color profiling and how colors are measured. This is a lot of our patented color correction technology and vibrancy and digital color fidelity come around some of the limitations inherent in an RGB color space. So back in the 1930s or 40s, I believe, a bunch of color scientists came together and started to describe a mathematic way to record and communicate what certain colors were. And they came up with the CIE XYZ color model, and you can see that there are places where either green or red dips below this horizon line. So what that is, these lines are the R, G, and B numbers that you would need to express this color spectrum. So at some point on the color spectrum, like in this green area, red should actually be negative. And in the XYZ color space, that's allowed. In RGB color spaces, if you go into Photoshop and hit a color picker and hit any pixel Color values in the RGB fields are never negative. So there's a problem there. You've got these areas in the color definition, this actual measured colored spectrum that can't be represented in RGB triplets. So what we've done is used a combination of empirical data, actually going out and measuring things, measuring how different sensors perform under different conditions, to build in a compensation for that lack of negative numbers, which is most seen in both greens and purples. So this is our digital color fidelity tool. I'll show you some examples here in a minute, but one of the hardest problems, one of the hardest things for a camera to capture is purple. It's off the spectrum. It's near, it's a very difficult thing for the RGB color gamut to record. So you go to a Lakers game, you take a shot, and you come back, and all their jerseys are blue. You go and take a picture of the FedEx box, and all the boxes are blue. You take a picture of some irises or purple flowers, and you come back and look at them, and they're all blue. And that's just a limitation of how cameras see the world, and the color space that they use to record those colors. And I'll show you some live examples about how we compensate for that in a very unique way. It's patented technology. We're the only company that I'm aware of that does it, and there's some really amazing results that it can produce just on that one feature right there. We also have a unique take to our exposure correction. All of these slides, all these images are taken from our website. If you go to athentech.com and then scroll down to the bottom and click the science, there's much more description here about what I'm talking about. This comes from chapter 2 on perfect exposure. So one of the things that I said back on slide 2 was that your eye is constantly adjusting the pupil diameter and also the cone and retina sensitivity, cone and rod sensitivity as you scan a scene. Well, a digital sensor doesn't do that. The sensitivity is what the sensitivity is. It's the same ISO across the entire sensor. And you define an aperture when you hit the shutter, and that's it. Those are locked in and they're never changeable. What the Perfectly Clear Perfect Exposure tool does is it compensates for that. And not on a global way, but on a pixel by pixel way. So it's as if each pixel were being illuminated by its own aperture. Again, some patented corrections that provide some amazing results, and also do it totally automatically. I'll show you a handful of examples in a minute that all use the exact same preset. Some are overexposed, some are underexposed, some are indoor, some are outdoor, and the same preset gives you beautiful results across all of these. The other problem with linear light capture devices, particularly digital sensors, is that they don't handle contrast in a very human or very natural way. So this uses some of our medical technology to analyze x-rays and make the detail in an x-ray much more visible and useful to doctors. We use the same patented technology in our contrast correction. What I like about this sample image of the bird here is that there's nothing the photographer did wrong in the picture at the top. It's properly exposed, it's proper focus, it's good dynamic range, but it's just not a very interesting or compelling image. The one on the bottom has much more depth, much more separation of the bird from the background, and so it feels like a better photo. So not only is it scientifically accurate, but it produces that emotional response that the top flat image really didn't. Mm-hmm. Back in the film days, this wasn't near as much of a problem. There was a broader dynamic range and sort of a natural, better sense of depth out of film. And some cameras are providing some level of in-camera correction. You know, when you set your JPEG options and you want it more contrasty or less contrasty. And that's usually just applying a typical curve like you would in Photoshop or Lightroom. Mm-hmm. And the technology that we apply is much more local, much more adaptive, and so it provides you with more control and a better looking image. But it is interesting to see how camera makers are trying to get back to what film used to do. So you pick a film that had the right feel, right? You can get the Belvias, or, you know, that each had its own characteristic.
Absolutely. Jeff, just a question that came in. John is asking if these slides are available on the website.
They're not right now. All the images and the examples are taken from the science page down at the bottom, but we can also post this somewhere. That'd be no problem at all, either in the Hangout here or in an FAQ on our website.
Yeah, I did post a link to the science page in the event page for this Hangout, along with the link to the free perfect exposure plugin.
Cool.
And as I was looking through those, the science pages, all the different chapters, even some of the same images are in there. Definitely the content. I mean, I think you would you'd get more from the science pages as they are now than just having the slideshow.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole lot more on the science pages. I'm just hitting on a few chapters.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you're interested in this stuff, go check that out and ping questions over here, and I can answer those.
Great. Thank you.
You betcha. So the one other thing that we do very uniquely, or one other thing we do a lot, but is our approach at vibrancy. So in a lot of other applications, what vibrancy means is add saturation in places with low saturation, and that works pretty well. But so it's sort of like an adaptive saturation control. And what other tools try to do is to make the images pop more by increasing the luminance. But as you do that, that also increases if you do that across the full RGB triplet, that increases saturation as well. And that also affects the hue. So you get all these weird changes when all you're trying to do is make the image pop more. So we've got a very unique approach to vibrancy. It does great vibrancy control without changing the color. So the orange is still orange, the blues are still blue. You don't get any color shifting. And it provides a really good high impact image very, very quickly.
Awesome.
So with that all done, I was trying to get that done pretty quickly. I went through less detail than I did back in February. If there aren't any other questions about the science, the image sensors, the difference between eyes, digital analog conversion, all that kind of stuff, I'll switch over to the plugin itself, and we'll go through. I think I've got 6 example images here. And we'll take a look at some live samples.
Yeah, well, before we do that, let me just remind folks that we're about halfway through here, that we are giving away 1 license for Perfectly Clear and also 1 for Perfect Eyes. And the way that you do that is by sending in your comment. You can just say hello, as a lot of people did in the beginning. Hello, all those people. Or questions, as we got a couple have come in, and we'd love to see some more questions about any of the science behind it, the software we're about to see, Lightroom specifically, any of that stuff. We'd love to entertain it and try and help you out with those answers. So the way that you do that, if you're not sure, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, and hopefully you can see that now. And so when you come to the Google event page, you'll see the Hangout. When it starts to play, once it's actually playing, up in the top is this little grid icon. Click on that, click the QA button, opens the panel on the right-hand side, and from there, just send in your questions or comments. Just say hello, how's it going? We'd love to hear from you, and that way you get entered. Thank you, Cheryl. You get entered in for the drawing that I will magically do at the end of our hour here. So thank you for that break, and thanks to Athentech, and thanks to Drobo for sponsoring us this month. So go ahead, Jeff. Thank you very much.
You bet, Rob. So I see a question over here from Peter. He says, every so often, Perfectly Clear seems to not recognize facial features in headshots. Is there a reason or workaround to force it to do so? So what I've been talking about is our core correction. It's what you get for free in perfect exposure. What Peter's asking about are what we call the beautify corrections to do things like teeth whitening and eye enlargement, eye sharpening, and blemish removal, and those kinds of things. So what it does is it automatically analyzes the picture. It finds the faces, or in Peter's case, it attempts to find the faces. It figures out the age, the gender, and the skin type of each person, and does different tune corrections for the different faces. But yeah, sometimes it misses people, and that seems to be happening to Peter. One thing that you can do, Peter, is if you're working in Photoshop, is do a selection around the face, maybe about twice as large as the face, or 80%, so a nice border around the face, and run Perfectly Clear only on that selection. Sometimes if the faces are too small in the frame, then they don't get detected individually. But if you do a selection and you run perfectly clear only on that selection, it has a better chance of finding it. And we're also working behind the scenes on a feature for an upcoming version of Perfectly Clear where you can manually identify a face. So you can click on the eyes and say, okay, you didn't find this face in this photo, but I know exactly where it is.
Right.
So, not something that we have commercial right now, sort of the skunk works running behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, that's great. When it attempts to figure out the age, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it really is. The age and the gender identification are amazing. We've got some examples. I'll see if I can find them here in a second of a man and a woman standing next to one another in sort of a wedding shot. And the man's got kind of a 5 o'clock shadow, and obviously the woman doesn't. And that gender detection is really good because it does different kinds of sharpening and skin smoothing on her than it does to him.
Wow.
So a lot of other of these automatic like portrait correction tools, the men end up with just a gray smear across their face because it tries to do skin smoothing on the 5 o'clock shadow. So it turns them into just kind of this gray blob, where our tools will offer still razor sharp, facial hair, eyebrows, those kinds of things. But on her, if you then pan over to her, she's nice and much smoother, and it treats those different skin types differently.
Yeah, that seems to be bordering on magic.
Yeah, and then the age is also very interesting because if you have, say, an older woman next to a younger woman, it can be actually a little offensive to remove too many features or wrinkles or blemishes from an older woman. It's like, oh, is that what you needed to do to make me,
oh, sure, yeah,
in this photo? So we tune those corrections differently for older faces than for younger ones. Older people have wrinkles, and we shouldn't hide that. We shouldn't take that away. That's part of who they are. So we try to leave those details intact while taking a younger face and making it a little smoother and a little softer. So some very cool things to focus in on those. Beautify corrections, which I'm not focused on in this talk, but I'm sure we can do a hangout just on those at some point.
Yeah, right, sure. Glenn Hewitt is saying, on a group image, it doesn't seem to see teeth whitening or eye correction.
Yeah, the teeth and the eyes are smaller features, so it's harder to identify those individual places or those individual regions where the teeth and eyes are. Again, our best solution right now is to do a region around each of those faces in Photoshop. And then, so if you do a selection in Photoshop and run Perfectly Clear, it'll operate only on that region, only on that selection. So it allows you to do either different corrections in different parts of your image or give it a better chance of identifying the full face by taking out more of the distractions. So give that a shot.
All right, excellent. Peter is saying thanks for the response. So that's great. Glad that was able to help you, Peter. Richard is also saying the manual ID of faces is very, very appreciated and welcome. So that will be welcome when that rolls out. Let's see. Cecil is asking if you can review batch processing steps and round trip steps. I think we're going to get into that here in a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have, that's not something that I was going to walk through in much detail. We do have a tutorial on our website. If you go to athentech.com/videos or click on the videos link down at the bottom or on the support page, there are two different tutorials there. One about doing batch processing in Lightroom, and then one about doing saving an action in Photoshop and doing batch conversion there. So check that.
Yeah, I've got some I can run through that. I put aside for that later. So if we got time, I'll definitely run through that.
Excellent.
For Cecil too. And also Martina is asking for the link to part 1. If you, I'll put it in the event page for this one, but on the Photo Focus website announcement of this particular Hangout, the link to the first one is also on there. So I'll make sure it's on the event page too. But if you just go to the Photo Focus website and see the current Hangout link there, it's embedded right inside of that one there. All right. All right, great. Thanks for those questions. Keep them coming in. I'm getting those names included in our list for the giveaway. So if you haven't sent in a question, just jump in there and say hi. And we'll know to enter your name in there for the giveaway. So, all right, back to you, Jeff.
All right, with any luck, I'm sharing my screen, and you can see the Perfectly Clear Complete plugin. So I ran this from Lightroom. I selected 6 images. in grid mode and just said edit in, picked the Perfectly Clear plugin, and had it create a new image, and these popped right up. So what you can see here is that's the before image straight out of the camera, and that's perfectly clear. All the images that I'm going to show here are just using our details preset. So I didn't make any complicated adjustments. I didn't choose any settings. I just say, hey, use the default preset. And what you can see on each of these is how adaptive the presets are. They analyze each photo individually and apply different corrections to different photos based on what they need. And if you want, you can click adjust and get all the nitty-gritty details. So I talked about exposure and depth in the presentation a minute ago. I talked about digital color, fidelity, and vibrance. The fidelity is actually turned off for the details preset. It can provide some great enhancements on landscapes. So if you click on our landscape preset, that turns digital fidelity on, or you can just do that yourself. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But everything else that we're going to do for now is just the default preset. So straight out of the camera, perfectly clear, one click. This is a great example of the exposure and the depth controls. The original image, it was too dark, it was very flat, it was a hazy day, so there's very little separation between the boat and the background. And boom, with one click, it fixes exposure, it fixes depth, it maintains the real color of the boat and the life preserver back here, the Canadian flag. With some auto exposure tools, those brightly saturated colors like the reds in this flag up here start to clip and get very kind of funky looking, especially on an automatic exposure correction that's this dramatic. But it's very natural, it's very real, and it's entirely automatic. And one thing I just love about it.
Yeah.
This is the example that I showed earlier. Again, it's straight out of the camera. There's no fault. There's nothing that the user did wrong. This was shot, I believe, with the 5D Mark III. It's got good bokeh. It's sharp. You can zoom in to 100% here and see. You know, the original was nice and sharp. So there's nothing the photographer did wrong, but just a little perfectly clear run through with just our details preset provides you a much more natural and much more compelling image really, really quickly. And again, when it does those exposure and contrast adjustments, those brightly saturated areas like around his eye and the feet stay very intact and very real looking.
Now, Jeff, when you're starting off in Lightroom, would it matter, or how much does it matter if you start off with a JPEG versus a RAW file?
There's a whole lot more data in a RAW file, so you can get better results with those. These days, I shoot JPEGs. They're smaller, they're easier. The quality out of an image out of the camera is beyond my needs. They look great. So I shoot JPEG only these days, which is kind of ironic because my last job, I ran a company that made RAW conversion software. Yeah, the quality of JPEGs coming out of cameras these days surpasses my needs. I'm not a professional photographer. I sell some of my works, but not very often. It's mainly just, you know, my use. If you need that extra detail, if you're doing HDR stacks like you mentioned, I will shoot RAW files for HDR stacks. There's more depth, more dynamic range in those, so it can be a good thing for that kind of thing.
Great, thank you.
Let me click over to the next photo here. So this is a good one that shows some of those purple colors that our digital color fidelity works really good with.
Oh, yeah.
These are lupins or blue bonnets, not exactly sure what they are. This is, here, let me get my little before and after slider. Straight out of the camera or normal perfectly clear corrections. And if I hit the digital color fidelity, I hope that's coming through in the screen sharing. You can see it turns from this blue to this very nice but subtle purple that these colors actually.
You could definitely see a much more purple.
Yeah, exactly. And the greens also get a little bit richer, a little bit more natural looking, a little bit more yellow, better, more natural feel to them as well. So yeah, I turn fidelity on a lot of my shots. I shoot a lot of landscapes. I shoot a lot of outdoor stuff. So it's what I actually do is take details, turn on my fidelity, and then create a new preset with just those corrections. So it's
Okay.
details plus fidelity, and then I batch correct everything with that.
Okay, great. We got a question from James Kohler. He's asking, do you do some corrections with exposure, such as white point, black point, etc., in Lightroom, then send to Perfectly Clear?
I don't. You can do that if you have a specific artistic impression you want to give to the photos. But my workflow is I shoot everything, I stick my memory card, I import everything into Lightroom, I batch convert everything using a preset that I just described. It's details with fidelity turned on. And then I go through those and see which ones I like, pick my keepers and publish them. I don't do anything beyond that. Yeah. You can do corrections before, but if you're doing stylistic, sort of artistic things, I would encourage you to do those after Perfectly Clear. It'll give you a better end result because we'll give you the most accurate starting point to go do your creative work or compositing or you know, any of those sorts of corrections.
Right. If you were shooting in RAW and you weren't going to do those types of exposure corrections, but would you recommend leaving the profile corrections for any lens distortion?
Yeah, the lens corrections are one thing that Perfectly Clear doesn't do.
Yeah.
And so yeah, basically what I do when I do shoot RAW for HDRs and those sorts of things, yeah, I zero out all of the settings except for the lens correction stuff.
Okay.
I shoot micro four thirds, so you can get some pretty dramatic barrel distortion in some of those lenses, and Lightroom does that automatically for you, which is a great feature.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
We'll click on to one more. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Let's go back to my details preset and zoom back out. Here's another example of just one of those shortcomings of shooting digital these days. You're out in, I don't know what this is, maybe the Mojave somewhere in Utah, I'm not sure, but this beautiful red rock landscape, and you take a picture and it's just flat and uninteresting, where something like that, or you can try our Vivid preset, maybe even a little more impactful, has much more real life feel. Here, I can go to a before and after view like that. Or you can come down and turn on our landscape preset, which is even more dramatic. It's a little bit higher contrast, and it turns on that digital color fidelity. So I think this is a little bit too much. So what you might do is either turn down the opacity a little bit to tone that in, and then maybe get something like that. And you could save that as a preset if you were actually out shooting this. You probably have 500 images, you know, that are all shot with the same lighting, same camera equipment. Create a custom preset, batch apply that to your whole shoot. Very, very quick and easy to get beautiful results, just like that.
Very cool.
One thing I'll point out is I'm using the presets here in Perfectly Clear Complete, these first 8. The Perfect Exposure product that I mentioned, those presets are also included in Perfectly Clear Complete, as are the Perfect Eyes and Perfect Skin presets. So if you want to experiment, you can see what the Perfect Exposure presets, what you can get for free from our website, and you can get a result like that. Maybe take an outdoor or exposure correction like that. It's very quick and easy to get some beautiful results very, very quickly. There's a nice one for
Absolutely, yeah.
So a nice little free plug-in. Go to our website, get it out, try it. It's all the same technology as the Perfectly Clear Complete for the exposure and the depth sections. It just doesn't have all the rest of those features.
Right, and I'll be showing that in just a little bit.
Very good. Yeah, here's another classic example. It's very similar to the last one. Straight out of the camera, shot into the light a little bit, so you get a little bit of haze. This is a little bit overexposed, but it has no emotional impact. If you saw this in your camera roll, you just kind of flip past it. Not a very interesting photo. Run it through Perfectly Clear, instantly get results like that. That's this is, you know, not that interesting. That's a good looking photo, and it feels much more like the actual scene did when you were there.
Yeah, yeah, that's substantially different.
And then the last example, yeah, another one, just straight out of the camera. Again, it's not a fault of the photographer. Didn't do anything wrong, but you remember it looking like this instead of that. So automatic corrections, patented corrections to do some amazing stuff very, very quickly.
Fantastic. All right, so we got about 15 minutes left in our Hangout time here. So we welcome any more questions or comments. If you haven't tuned in, if you missed earlier, the way to enter for our drawing at the end is just to leave a question or comment via the Q&A section there. If you're not sure, I am keeping an eye on the event page too, see if anybody posts something there. Sometimes people do that. I haven't seen it yet, so that's great. Where people are picking up on how to use the Q&A. So if you have questions that come in, I'm going to switch over to show something in Lightroom. So I won't see them until I come back over here again, because I'm only seeing one screen at a time here. Let me share my screen.
I'll keep my eye on the questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. And start my screen share. All right, are we seeing my screen up there? All right, great. So what I just want to show is Cecil had asked earlier about doing some batch processing with Lightroom. And so these are just some raw files I took of my son catching a largemouth bass recently. And, you know, I just had, of course, grabbed the camera quickly and just started taking pictures. And the exposures are not all, they're not bad, but they're not all great. They're not all the same. You know, they're a little bit different. So what I could do is I could select all of those together and click export. For the sake of kind of time and processing while we're doing this Hangout, I'll select two just so we can see that. But just know that you could select many more. And I'll click on the export button here. You might, when you first come into Lightroom, have it set to hard drive. But if you go up to here, you can see this is the Perfect Exposure plugin. This is the free one that Jeff was mentioning. And the link to that is on the event page for this Hangout.
Hey, Rob, let me interrupt. A couple of guys are saying that they're only seeing me. They're not seeing you.
Oh, okay. All right. That's thank you, people, for saying that. All right. How about now? Are they seeing me now?
Confirm out there in the Hangout world. I see your screen fine, Rob.
Yeah, it's the yeah, because I'm operating as cameraman now, so make sure that people can see. Usually Levi is the cameraman operator. All right, great. They're seeing me now. Okay, thanks, folks, for chiming in. All right, so in case you missed me doing this because you couldn't see my screen, what I said in the beginning is you can select as many photos as you wish to process. For the sake of processing speed, since I'm doing this Hangout and all that at the same time, I'll select 2 photos, but you know, select as many as you wish. And I'm going to click the export button here in Lightroom. And when you first come in, you might just see it set to hard drive. All right. When you have installed the plugin, you'll see that that is one of your options. You can export to Perfect Exposure. And this is the free plugin for Lightroom, which is linked off the event page. And so your first choice here is to choose from some of the presets. These are the same types of presets we saw in the demos that Jeff was doing. I kind of like the outdoor one. You know, you would obviously choose it based on your images and what you were trying to choose here. If you created any presets of your own, those would also be available here. All right. And so this isn't too different than the built-in ones, but I wanted to just to be able to show that you could access your own custom presets here as well. If you didn't want to see the Perfect Exposure window, you can check this box. I'm going to leave it unchecked so we can actually see what that looks like when it comes up here. But then your other options for export are really similar to just any other export. So in this case, I'm going to have these copies are going to be saved to the same folder as the original photos. They're going to be added to the catalog and even stacked with the original, all from the export dialog box. So almost like sending it to Photoshop and having those copies automatically added to the catalog and stacked with the originals, if that's how you want to do it. You can control your file naming and your file settings. Now, maybe I'm going a little overkill here. I tend to do that. I shot them in RAW. I want to keep them in ProPhoto RGB, but I probably could, you know, if I wasn't so hardcore in that way, do just fine setting this to 8-bit and maybe even Adobe RGB. All right, but I'm going to leave it that way because that's just how I roll. All your other settings for output as well, I'm going to leave this set. I'm not resizing. In this case, resolution is really irrelevant. You can put any number in there you want. Doesn't matter at this point. I'm not going to sharpen. I'm not going to do the other things. So once I've got this set, I could even save this as a preset. All right, and that would even speed things up a lot more If I just name this, I never spell when people are watching me. All right, the same as my preset that I selected up here. All right, and when I click export, in this case, watch what happens here in Lightroom. We'll see that first thing that happens are the TIFF copies are created. So we'll see those start to appear. And so there's one TIFF, and you can see that it's stacked with the original. And then perfect exposure opens up. All right. And in this case, the preset that I had was really just the outdoor one with light diffusion turned on. That was the extent of my custom preset there. And that's how it came up with that already dialed in. And we can see that is the difference here on this one, right? And it really did, make it look a lot better than it did at the beginning. I could change my mind here, but as I have multiple photos selected, I can also even preview those one at a time inside of perfect exposure here. All right. Once I'm satisfied with that, I'll click Save All, and then the perfect exposure settings are now being applied to each of those two TIFF copies, and then we'll start to see that appear and update back inside here in Lightroom. And then there, the preview is just updated for each of those. And if I select the TIFF copy and the raw original, I can come into my compare here, and I can see, so we can see is the TIFF on the left and the original raw on the right. And that could really speed up your workflow by having that kind of batch process just right out of the gate, go through and correct and fix many of your images at once in a given shoot. And then from there, do any other artistic or creative adjustments that you want to make. Lens corrections was turned on for this. I think it was probably shot with the 50mm lens, so probably didn't do too much. But you definitely could do all of those things there. All right, so let's see if we have any other questions. We see Jeff. Let me make sure, actually, by telling us that you only saw me, you get entered in the drawing to win. So I'm going to write down a few additional names here.
Ken asked a question. He said, in Perfect Eyes, can I select one person out of 3 all in the same image to edit? Hey, Ken, this is kind of this similar question that, that Peter asked earlier. Right now, the best you can do is open that photo in Photoshop, select one image, or select one of the faces using any of the Photoshop region or selection tools, and then run the Perfectly Clear Photoshop plugin. And that'll give you the ability to isolate one face and make different automatic corrections there. And then save, close, go back to the original photo, select the other faces, and do those differently. So we don't have a way built into the plugin to make different specific corrections on different people at this time. That's another one of those features we're looking at for down the road. And then also just to clarify what I said earlier is, it does analyze individual faces for age, gender, and skin type. So the corrections that it applies, say with skin smoothing at 50, it is automatically tuned for different people, different skin types, age, and gender. But I think what Ken was asking is, can you adjust those corrections for just one person, not another? So the short answer is no, not at this time. But we're aware of the desire to do that, and it's on the horizon.
Great. I'm just making sure I've got all of these new names put in there. So we got just a comment from Glenn saying thanks for giving the original owners the new updates for free.
Yeah, so we launched our version 2 plugin about 18 months ago, I think. And since then, we've launched 3 new products: Perfectly Clear, or Perfect Exposure, which is the free product, Perfect Eyes, and Perfect Skin. But if you own Perfectly Clear Complete, you get those other ones for free. We put those features into Perfectly Clear Complete itself. As you saw earlier, you can move through all of those presets from all of the various products in the one tool. But you also get a license to Perfect Skin and Perfect Eyes if you want to use those on a different computer, or if it's easier just to do those specific plugins instead of launching Complete each time because you're only doing the portraits or something.
Yeah. I got a question from John. Rob just tried export to perfect exposure, but the preset box is grayed out running Windows 10. I suspect if you don't have any custom presets, it's just going to be kind of grayed out on the left-hand column, but the right side, you should be able to access all of the built-in or pre-installed presets that came in. Let me share my screen and maybe make more sense if I show you what I'm talking about here.
And then one other thing, if you have any specific product-related questions, feel free to email help@athentech.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We got a team of experts there to help you out with specific issues if you have those.
Great. So if I recall, before I had a custom preset, the system presets drop-down menu was kind of grayed out because there was only this one. You couldn't choose the other, but you should still be able to select from the pre-installed presets that came with it. So if that's not the case, what was that email again, Jeff?
help@athentech.com. Or you go to our website and click support up in the top, and there's some FAQs, and you can start an email chat. There's also a phone number there if you want to just call and talk to somebody. 24 hours, 7 days a week. Give them a ring. We're here to help.
Great. All right. So hopefully that will solve your problem, because I think that when I had first, it's been a while since I was in that state, but I think that's what happened there. Oh, John says yes, that was it. Okay, great.
Excellent.
Hey, we just saved support from one contact. So. All right, great. All right, so as we kind of come down, we got a comment from Doug here. So Lucid, yeah, let's talk about Lucid for a minute. So Lucid on iOS rocks, by the way. It's a standard part of his mobile workflow. Awesome product. So Jeff, can you talk a little bit about what Lucid is? Yeah,
sure. We launched a Lucid line of products earlier this year, both a standalone product that runs on Macs and Windows. It's all the same technology of Perfectly Clear, but a little simpler interface. It doesn't expose all the same tools. You can't make custom presets, things like that. And it's a standalone. It doesn't run in Photoshop or Lightroom. So it's just a quick way to batch correct a bunch of images, or if you don't have Photoshop and Lightroom, you don't want to worry about all those details. It's all the same automatic image correction technology and just a simpler to use product. Then we have the mobile apps on Android and on iOS. So we've got Lucid on iOS, which is, again, all the same technology, just built for your mobile device.
All right. Got Barry is, I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment. Any competitive pricing from ON1, Nick, or MacFun?
I'm an engineering guy, so I don't know what the sales offers are. Our stuff is incredibly reasonably priced as it is. We just had a big sale, which ended a few days ago. So unfortunately, that's behind us. But yeah, I don't know the promotions or cross sales or exactly how that works. So,
and they're kind of different. I mean, there's some similarities, I guess, but there's a lot of
but most of those are for stylistic stuff,
right?
You know, your black and white conversions, or adding your style to a photo. Perfectly Clear is really about giving you the best, most accurate looking image really, really quickly.
Yeah, very, very different. All right, well, I've got to run my numbers here to pick up our winners. So we've got a nice list of folks. Thanks for all those questions or comments. If any appear magically here, I'll try to get you in there. But the way to win is you got to actually still be here. So sometimes, people who I pick may have had to go for some other really important reason. But so our first name that will win our Perfectly Clear prize is Marcia Ferry. So Marcia, if you're here, just jump in the Q&A. Do a little game show run. Make sure we know that you're still here. And the way that you'll claim your prize is to email me, rob@photofocus.com. Just say, hey, I'm the winner of Perfectly Clear, or whatever it is that you will win, and I will follow up via email with you. So Marcia is our Perfectly Clear winner, and our perfect eyes would go to Richard Firth, if I wrote that down correctly. Richard. So Richard and Marcia, if you're still here, please jump in the Q&A. If you're not here, I've already got the runners-ups for both of those. So hopefully we won't have to go that far.
I'm not seeing any questions.
I'm not either. So Marcia or Richard, we're counting down here. Okay, so hopefully our next winner, I'm going to pick our next winner for
Marcia's there.
Oh, she is. Whoa, hey, they're both here. Hey, that's right down to the wire. Oh, but Marcia's already got Perfectly Clear.
Custom.
So, all right. So our next winner for Perfectly Clear would be Michael Mitchell. Michael, are you still here?
And
Michael.
Richard is in as well.
I got Richard. So Richard, please email me at rob@photofocus.com for our Perfect Eyes prize. All right. And Marcia, thank you for being so gracious with that. And so Michael Mitchell, are you still here? Michael? And usually they appear right when we're about to announce the next potential winner of our prize. So we'll give Michael a couple more clicks of the clock. Hey, he's there. Great. Michael, glad that you're still here. So Michael, just send me an email at rob@photofocus.com. And so I've been putting, as I've been able to try and multitask here, putting links to various things in the kind of event page on Google+. I'm going to add in the link to our previous episode, so you can rewatch that one as well. And all the other things, perfect exposures in there, and the science behind it. So I think that's all in there. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Jeff, for giving us this presentation, answering our questions. It's been fantastic. Hopefully we can maybe have you back for another one. Maybe we'll just focus more on the retouching the portrait facial stuff. That would be a great one. For anyone else, we do our Lightroom Hangout once a month. We're trying to narrow in on the first Monday of the month so we can get more of a regular schedule. We've been bouncing around quite a bit. There also are a couple other Hangouts coming up on PhotoFocus. I don't have the date right here in front of me, too many things in front of me. So if you head over to photofocus.com, you can like our page on Facebook, our Twitter account. You'll be up to date on all those things. We have a newsletter that goes out as well, so you can follow along with we do lots of Hangouts for lots of products, and we definitely have done some on some of Perfectly Clear's in other Hangouts as well. So there's definitely quite a bit of content on Perfect Exposure, Perfectly Clear on photofocus.com. So until next month, have a great time. Enjoy your summer. Jeff, thank you very much. Enjoy your summer. Hope you get to be home for a while and enjoy your time at home.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Take care, everyone.